Now I want to start with something extremely fascinating, at least it has really fascinated me. Yeah. And if you're a government in power in Africa and you're taking notes, this is the first thing you should write down. Bread is important. Bread is dangerous, yeah, for dictators. Bread is the trigger of quite a number of revolutions. And in Sudan, trouble started with bread. Oh yes, the price of bread tripled, and it was just too much for the people. They took to the streets, and that was the beginning. Now, most of us know the very famous quote from the French Revolution. Yeah, if people don't have bread, why don't they eat cake? So again, it seems in the French Revolution, bread is mentioned again. Yeah. And now, I'm going to give you an absolute shocker, very controversial one. In Kenya, yeah, the second liberation in the 90s, yeah, that caused Moi to suddenly go bald and start looking old within a very short time, had bread involved. Harsh economic times and hyperinflation, yeah, which Kenyans were able to very clearly see, and I was there, yeah, I witnessed it and experienced it. The price of bread more than doubled within a very short time. Now I'm well aware that nobody has ever mentioned bread in connection to Kenya's second liberation. However, I can assure you, yeah, that bread, amongst other things, was a trigger of the Kenyan second liberation. But let's go back to Sudan. Now that you're fully aware of the fact, mkate si kitu ya kuchezea. If you want to remain in power, mkate. Yeah. And so in Sudan, the protests started on December 19th, 2018. Yeah, just the other day, end of last year, end of the year 2018. And in a flash, the protesters changed gear from bread to the source, yeah, of all these problems as far as they were concerned. Their leader, Omar al-Bashir, and it very quickly shifted to Omar al-Bashir must go. And one of the chants of protesters was very interesting. They were saying, and I quote, "Just fall, that is all. Just fall, that is all." Yani, hatutaki story nyingi, just come out of power. Predictably, strongman Omar al-Bashir responded in the only way strongmen know how to respond. With such violence and arrests, yeah, that the international community became very concerned about human rights violations in Sudan. In retrospect, that was a fatal mistake, very fatal. You see, when there's any uprising, any revolt, yeah, by a group of people, you must cut it down, end it very quickly, yeah, to avoid it spreading. And historically, a violent response, yeah, to remind people who's in charge and to remind people how vicious and brutal and how dangerous and what harm you can do to them, usually works. Actually, it works sometimes, not all the time. And the big danger here is this: if it doesn't work, you're done. Because what you'll actually have done is to fan the trouble, yeah, to fan the fires of revolution, to inspire even more revolt, yeah, and to make people very determined to keep up their protests. You know, it's very simple. Yeah, if you make people fear, yeah, it can work. However, you have to be sure that people have not reached the end, the end of their patience. And it is not always very easy to be able to gauge if people have reached the end. Let me just give a very simple example. That cowardly dog, yeah, you just pretend you're picking up a stone and it's running away with its tail between its legs. But you get into a situation where you've cornered that dog in an alley somewhere and it has nowhere to run. It has nowhere to escape except through you. Then that dog will turn very dangerously, yeah, against you. So the trick when you're dealing with humans, yeah, the very tricky situation, is how do you tell the people have reached the end of themselves? Yeah, because if they have, violence is the wrong very wrong, the last thing you want to do in response. And so after this first fatal mistake by Bashir, what happened next is that he realized he was in trouble. So on February 22nd, he declared a state of emergency. And then he dissolved all governments, regional and the national one, and replaced the leaders with military and intelligence service officers. Still, things didn't cool down. The protests grew, from small groups to right across the country. And so, on March 8th, Bashir decided to change tactics. He made an announcement that all women who had been arrested over the protests would be released. Then there's another very interesting tactic Bashir tried. 32 students from the Darfur area were arrested. And allegedly, of course under duress, they confessed that they'd been trained in Israel to carry out acts of sabotage against the Sudanese regime of Bashir. Now, Bashir has always had problems with Darfur. You'll remember that he has been indicted at the ICC for crimes against humanity. And those ones stem from what he did to his own people in the Darfur area. And previously, amongst many of the Arabs in the country and non-Darfur people in Sudan, there's always been an ill feeling towards Darfur. But this time Bashir was in for a shock because protesters responded. And what did they tell Bashir? They told him, "We are all Darfur." We are all Darfur. They chanted that. In other words, what they were telling him is that you will no longer divide us to rule us and to dictate on us. That has ended. That will never work again. Not with us. Just fall. That is all. Now you know the main protests have been outside the military headquarters in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, which when you think about it is just a suicide mission. Because in the old Sudan, all that would have happened is that the soldiers would have come out and fired into the crowds. End of protests. But on 10th April, a very curious sight, something very difficult to believe, was sighted. It started happening. The soldiers were shielding the protesters from militias who were trying to attack them. Obviously militias close to Bashir, who wanted Bashir to remain in power at all costs. And the very next day, on 11th April, Bashir was gone. Multiple eyewitness reports say that he was seen at the airport, and he was seen getting onto an aircraft, which left, and shortly after he left the country, the airport was closed in Khartoum. And shortly after that, Sudanese were shocked on national television when Bashir's assistant vice president, General Awad Ibn Auf, was sworn in to take over as president. And the whole idea was that he was going to have a military caretaker government for 2 years to pave way for a civilian government. Now, of course, the general was a Bashir man, and obviously this was a Bashir tactic, yet another tactic to cool the crowds. But it didn't work. And the general, after only 1 day in power, 1 day, resigned. And he appointed a General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan Abdul Rahman to take his place and rule the country. But the protests continue. Protesters are adamant. They want nothing less than a civilian government in power. They're not interested anymore in a military government. It is clear no tricks, the usual tricks from the handbook of a dictator, will work anymore in Sudan. The people of Sudan are very united and they're very serious. They want change. They must have change and nothing else. Anything less will be a betrayal of the lives that have already been lost in this revolution. Now, the most fascinating part of this story of the revolution in Sudan is that it has been peaceful. And the protesters have been super organized. You know, when this kind of protests take place anywhere in the world, a very easy way to end those protests is to introduce violence. You infiltrate the protesters, cause violence, and then you have the perfect excuse to break up the protests. But the protesters have been so organized that they have been impenetrable. Nobody has been able to infiltrate them and penetrate them to cause violence, and therefore they have remained very peaceful. Another thing that goes wrong with these protests is that people get hungry. Yeah, you're human. People get thirsty. Because remember, these protests are all day, daily. And sometimes hunger will trigger looting. Again, the perfect excuse to break up the protests. Yeah, because people are looting other people's property. Therefore, you have to come in to restore order. But people have been volunteering, yeah, and giving out food for free and drinks for free to the protesters. The protesters even clean the streets in the evening and organize areas for prayer. Yeah. These have to be the most organized protests in the history of the world. No kidding. And look what the protests have achieved in such a short time. Bashir is gone. And even the military government, which is hanging on to power now, it is very clear they will have to go for this crisis to end. It is really now too late for anybody to make a sensational comeback, yeah, of a military government of some sort. Yeah. In the end, they'll have to bow down to pressure and give the people what they want. Yeah. A caretaker civilian government that they can trust to change the country called Sudan forever. Now, let's take a very quick look at the former strongman, former president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, yeah, and try and understand the man a little better, yeah, because all these troubles started under his watch and because of him. Now, there are a number of very fascinating things about Bashir. For instance, the 75-year-old man does not have a single child of his own. Yeah. In other words, it seems the Bashir name will end with this man. Now we shall look at that, plus some other very fascinating facts that I'm sure you didn't know about Bashir. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.